Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you are well on this Sunday. Starting to be, quite a bit more Ren than you have become used to, probably once a week before, and it's been twice a week now for a bit, so hopefully you don't mind that. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I've discussed before, but approach it from a slightly different angle, which is the relationship between the NI dominant and the future, the ability to predict the future, which is something that is often taken as given by sections of the community. That there is a subtle but strong link between being an NI dominant and having an ability to, if not to foretell, to make predictions. And as we will see, this is a topic that is more nuanced and more complex than at first appears. Some elements, I think, are a little bit fanciful, but other elements are really definitely worth paying more attention to. So before I move on, just remember that I have written 2 books in the last year and a half. The Ecstatic Soul, my book on the INFJ, and The Infinite Castle, my new novel. Both are available in the description box below for less than $10. Thank you for your support. Now, we know that the INFJ type and the INTJ types, NI dominant types, are types that are usually associated with having a vision. I push in the Ecstatic Soul, in my book, The Ecstatic Soul, for a slightly different approach to this notion. In other words, that obviously anyone is capable of having a vision regardless of what their type is, long-term vision included, and that what distinguishes the NI lead from the other types is not so much that they are capable of having a vision, but that they are oriented to the future as something which they strongly feel like they have an intuition of what will happen and what ought to happen, regardless of what actually happens. Okay, so it's an important distinction. I call this trait, and I call it an existential trait, prescience, as opposed to vision. So vision, we can say any type's capable of it, having great vision, no debate about that. It's not even clear to me that NI dominants are the most represented among the people that we usually describe having great visions of the future, great plans and stuff like that. Maybe INTJs to some extent, but with INFJs, it's a bit less obvious, and that's partly because often, at least insofar as we understand the term nowadays, when you think, oh yeah, this man or this woman has a vision, we tend to think they have a vision of what the future will be like technologically, or what they want to achieve, in the business world or in the political world, in order to make that vision of the future take place, shape the future. And that usually comes with comes handy in such cases, having very good extroverted judgments, because you can, especially TE, because then you can create systems that facilitates the advent of that vision. So INFJ is not necessarily very well placed in this case to have a vision in this sense. And of course, the picture of the somewhat idealized picture of the oracle being able to kind of foretell the future, it's not something that we can really associate with the INFJ or any other type. So prescience is something that is different from having a vision in this sense. It's that regardless of whether or not things happen as you think they will happen, you are experiencing life as if you were very closely in touch with what will happen. You always project it forward into the future at some level. But it's not even so much a question of what the content of the future will be. It's almost more like a temporal notion of how you experience your own being. But having read quite a bit of Carl Jung recently, and I will probably continue reading Jung for a while because I'm engaged in reading his collected works. It's no less than 14,000 pages, so that's quite a bit of reading to do. I'm only at about page 2,000 at the moment, so I have still a long way to go. But he has something interesting to say about this notion of prescience, or how I would describe an I-dominance vision. He has, whereas I come at it in the Ecstatic Soul more from like a philosophical / existential perspective, Jung comes at it more from a psychological / psychoanalytical perspective. And I think that what he has to say about this is worth sharing. Again, I think that his account backs up the idea that we're really talking more so about prescience than about prescience in the term in the use in which I employ it, than about vision. What Jung says effectively is this. He says there's a lot that's going on in our unconscious. And precisely because it's going on in our unconscious, we are not conscious of it. But there's a lot that's going on down there. As so happens, that's also his understanding of introverted intuition as a function. It's a function of perception that is peculiarly sensitive to the movements of the unconscious and to patterns of the unconscious, which it brings to the surface in the form of symbols. Now, there's a reason why it comes to the surface in the form of symbols. And that echoes also back to the video I released yesterday when I was talking about Nietzsche being an I-dominant and writing Zarathustra, which is mostly composed around and articulated around symbols. Now, it comes to the surface in the form of symbols because symbols serve as a substitute for propositional truth. It serves as a substitute for very clear, precise products of consciousness that we are articulating in language and to which we can ascribe truth or falsity. You know, the precision of scientific language, for example, or everyday language insofar as it is sincere, honest, and transparent and well thought about. A symbol is always a little bit more vague. Its outline is a bit more blurry. Its boundaries are a little bit more porous. And that's the best that we can do to bring archetypal unconscious material to consciousness, which is why it comes in the form of symbols. In a way, the symbol is not to be celebrated or denigrated on its own, but to understand the form of a symbol, or the allegory, which is composed around symbols, is to understand that this is the best that the conscious mind can do when it grapples with the contents of the unconscious, because the contents of the unconscious are less heavy in libido expenditure, in psychic energetic expenditure. In other words, the contents in the unconscious, they're very numerous, and they end up, maybe not dictate, but significantly influence our conscious thoughts. But if they are unconscious, one direct correlate of this is that there is not a huge amount of libido attached to them. There's not enough libido attached to them that they actually reach the threshold of consciousness. Anything that is in consciousness has a psychic energy attached to them at a sufficient level that they are conscious. Anything that's less conscious has less libido attached to them, and that's why it's less determinate, it's less precise, because in order to reach a level of determination, you need to have enough of a level of libido attached to it. So again, blurred, porous, vague, but nevertheless existent. That's well represented by the symbol. Jung's thesis is that the anti-dominants, that's their trade. That's what they are best able to perceive. And anti-dominance and SE-dominance at different levels are very good when it comes to being sensitive to the details and patterns in the external physical world, the conscious world, conscious world of perception. Anna is more attuned to the unconscious world of perception, that is, to the perception of unconscious contents, archetypal contents, expressed in symbolic form. Now, we get to the stage where we bring this all back to the idea of prescience, because prescience, I said, is linked to experiencing oneself as if oneself was oriented to the future and as if one had a presentiment of what was going to happen. And in a way, it's regardless of the contents of what actually happens. It has more to do with the form of what actually happens. So you might not be able, and nobody is able to tell what the future will be like, but NI dominants tend to have a strong sense of the broad sort of, framework or environment of where things will unfold. So it's more about the form than about the content. Now, what Jung says is the unconscious, it has an influence over our conscious thoughts. But it's not just a matter of we have a Freudian slip, and so the Freudian slip reveals that we were really thinking about, what we slipped about. So say like, if someone says, I miss Charlie, and they really meant Fred, and they or they say, I miss Charlie, right? Even though they're dating Fred, that's a Freudian slip, they're really missing Charlie. Well, that's just one very superficial example, ultimately, of what a Freudian slip is, or what unconscious concepts are, because from the Jungian perspective, in the unconscious, you have a lot of what is really going to be important in your life, not because it's coming from outside, because we don't have the capacity to predict what's coming from outside, but because in the unconscious is what's already forming in terms of our own motivations. So what we experience in the conscious world to be our motivations and states of mind and perceptions and thoughts and proclivities on one particular day, one particular week, Jung's thesis is that has already been germinating and gestating in the unconscious, and it's only now reaching consciousness because now there's enough libido attached to it, enough libido investment in it. So there's a strong connection between what's in your unconscious and the direction that you will give to your life in the future, that is at the point where the contents become conscious, and as conscious contents, they become reasons for action. They become things on the basis of which you can act. But these things, for Jung, already exist in the unconscious at this slightly more vague, less defined level. It is in this respect that they dictate or influence the form of the future for a particular person. So if the NI dominant is peculiarly sensitive and attuned to the contents of the unconscious, he's also going to be attuned to those contents which provide the broad frame of what we will ultimately be motivated to do, have reasons to do. Because it's already gested in the unconscious, the NI dominant is capable of perceiving those contents. They're never going to come out as literal statements because the contents are too vague when they are in the unconscious. They can become literal statements once they become reasons, but then everyone has them. You don't have to be an NI dominant. What the NI dominant can do is to be able to perceive at a coarse-grained level those seeds that are in the unconscious that will eventually become reasons for action, motivations, and so on. Comes out as symbols, and they cannot really be more than that. So the NI dominant has to work in this particular instance in terms of allegories to express them. But it's an interesting work, and Jung has spent time working on this, and maybe at some later point I'll talk about this, to look at the correlations between those archaic mythological statements or those symbolic statements and what in them can be taken to constitute the form of what in fact happens later in someone's life. So prescience for an INFJ and an INTJ from this Jungian perspective has everything to do with the peculiar constitution of the NI function and its connection with the contents of the unconscious. So hopefully that was good and you find it helpful. Let me know in the comments what you think, as usual, and don't forget about my Patreon page. All right, I'll see you next week, guys. Bye-bye.